And that's when I heard my name, and it was a familiar sound. So when I turned around, it was my mother, and she was at the bottom of the stairs. So I turned around before I'd knocked on the door. So she had just caught me before knocking on the door or opening the door or whatever I was doing. And so I ran down to greet her, only she grabbed me and she turned around and ran. And there was a car waiting around the corner with her new husband in it. The car was running and they were ready for a quick getaway. So when she saw me going back to my babysitter's house, she jumped out of the car, ran up, called my name, grabbed me, and then ran me back to the car. And when she put me in the front seat with, in front of her, between her and her new husband, as she's pushing me in and following behind me, she's telling me, "This is your new daddy." It was totally validated in stealing another man's child based off of what he was told. He felt that he was in the right to steal someone's child. The courts feel that they are justified in doing the same thing based on what they were told. Had they done their job, had they followed their own laws and their own criteria, I would have been reunited with my father at the age of 8. The age of 8. So the state let me down. And I hold them equally responsible for this whole catastrophe. I'm dead if I stay in that house. Well, she must have realized what I was doing because she went back out the front door and caught me at the corner of the house. And she lifted me up off of my bike by my neck.
Oh my God.
Pulled me up off the bike, and she was crushing my throat. Well, I know that it's easy to live in denial. And I know that for other people out there that are like me, if they're not thinking that it's important, there might be a little bit of denial going on, because I know there's a spot inside that we all have that we're protecting, but it's the curiosity. Like, I really want to know, but I'm afraid to ask. Or I really want to know, but I'm so angry at this whole situation, I don't think I need to deal with it. But if you can imagine that I'm full of holes, 50% of me has holes. And those holes are painful, and there's nerve endings around the outside edges of all these holes, right? And in order to dull that pain, I have to stuff stuff in there. I have to kind of like pack it so I'm not feeling that pain. And we grow up packing these holes, and it's a paper thin filling that makes it appear like we don't have holes, that we're a whole person, until something happens and you're like, okay, this pain is real. And when I found my father, I was able to pull off that paper thin layer and take out that stuffing. And I was able to replace it with the unconditional love that I never realized that he still had for me. So now those holes are really filled with love and who I am. I have the answers to all those curiosity questions. I know who my family is now. I did DNA tests, and they reached out to me and said, "Who are you?" And I now know who my other half of my world is. I was able to go on a family reunion road trip, and I went and met them.
Yeah, there's a real value to your experiences in bringing in children and bringing in young people who are, find themselves at the forefront of these issues, because they don't know what's happening to them, like day to day. Right. They can't see it because you didn't see it. You thought that was your, you were like happy to see your mum. Your mum grabs you and chucks you in a car and says, "This is your new daddy." So then you don't go, "Hang on a minute, I'm calling the cops." Right.
Right.
You're not equipped to do that as a 4-year-old, as an 8-year-old, as a 12-year-old. You don't have those, you don't have the armory to do that. So now you're giving your message. I feel there's a huge value in you being able to, I think of all the people that I've spoken to, and what it would have been if their children as well would have just had an avenue to this kind of understanding as to what is going on and why it's not it's not always cool not to see daddy, and it's not always cool not to see mummy.
On a train, in a bus, in a car, on the way to your job. All alone with your kids, with your wife, or with your dog. You can listen anywhere, you can listen everywhere, to the Philip Malowney Podcast.
Hi, welcome back to the latest installment of the Philip Malowney Podcast. I'm very pleased to be joined by Dawn Enderia McCarty. Dawn is a cybersecurity specialist, mother of two, and she joins me today from sunny Florida. Welcome, Dawn.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, well, it's great that we've been able to get together and have a nice conversation around how our paths have crossed, etc., which leads us into your amazing story, which I hope the viewers are going to find compelling. And obviously, you know, spoiler alert, you're still here, yeah, and you're very much alive.
Yep.
Because part of the story is you had your very own missing poster at one point.
Yes, I did. I didn't see the original. I've never seen the original. So the missing poster came in at a later point, actually, when I was doing my criminal justice final, and
Right.
the final was on childhood abductions and human trafficking. Now, I knew that I had been abducted as a child, but it was always a joke, so it wasn't really something I took seriously because everybody always laughed about it. And then when I was working on the final, I found a group of people that had the exact same story I had. And I started thinking, well, wait a minute, what is this? And I actually went and met with them, and I sat and participated in a study that was actually done out of the London Metropolitan University. That may not be exactly correct, but I can look it up. And this lady came and she sat with all of us, and she was studying the long-term effects of childhood abduction. And I started learning that, oh my gosh, this was not cool. This was not right. This was a, bad thing.
Yeah.
And it was no longer a joke. And my final paper actually became about me.
Wow.
The
Yeah.
whole paper was my own story.
I'm not surprised at all, actually, because from what we've obviously had introduction conversations, etc. But I've found your story fascinating, and we will be definitely going into a real deep dive around what happened to you. But I wanted to look around your lovely area there and look at some of the things that probably give us a little bit of an insight into into your life. I see you've got some nice candles, stars. There's a fish tank as well. Is there anything there with a particular story or relevance to best describe you?
There is a lot, that I bring in the elements, so I have a little bit of water, I have a little bit of metal, the grounding elements, right?
Okay.
A lot of the stuff that you see on the bookcases are things that I have either written myself, things that I am involved in. So like I have the CISSP, which is part of my cybersecurity side.
Mm-hmm.
I also have a lot of the parental alienation type books. I have the one written by Dr. Bill Burnett. I have books that other people have written that I use, and sometimes I display depending on who I'm interviewing. So if I interview them, then I display the book if I have it. So, I mean, this background kind of changes with me, and it's kind of like my zen and my mood. So
Excellent. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, it certainly looks inviting. It certainly looks inviting. But I like that. So you're quite a spiritual person.
One little, sorry, I didn't mean to. There's one little additional piece of comfort that this whole setup brings is that the fish tank is used to belong to my late father.
Right.
So he's at my back. He's got my back, and he's also right here with me because I'm sitting at his desk as I do my interviews and as I talk to people. I'm sitting at his desk, so I'm about my father's work in a sense.
Okay, so your father, like all fathers, are very important, or is very important to you, and was very important to you. So, what was your earliest memories of your father?
Surprisingly, I have a very vivid memory of certain aspects. I don't remember everything, but I distinctly remember things way back to when I was 2 years old. Wow. And I've had people say, "Oh, you couldn't possibly remember that," but I can describe the environment, the setting. I know exactly what our apartment looked like. I can describe it to a T, the layout. I knew what color our couch was. I knew what the building looked like. I know that there was a swimming pool in the middle. It was a U-shaped apartment, 2 stories, and it was white. I mean, I remember all these things, and I was trying to figure out why would I remember certain aspects. And I think because when I was ripped out of one world and thrown into another, that was my brain's way of saying that it was holding on to the memories that I had, so that it would help me in this foreign world I was all of a sudden in. I call it my personal twilight zone. So this world was not real. My brain attached to those memories because those were real. Yeah. So I have very strong memories about certain things. And I remember going on trips. I remember going over and actually visiting my mother after she had left. She moved out and moved into another apartment. And my dad and I would go and try and visit her. And I remember the last time we tried to visit her, and I remember her apartment too. I can describe it in the areas that I was in anyway. And we weren't there for very long. And then when we left, I always left with my dad. She never tried to keep me. There was never any argument over any of that. So I always went home with my dad. He was my sole caretaker, and she was done. And that particular moment was the last time I saw her before she left the state. And so then for about a 2-year period.
So you've got this very, very vivid childhood memories around certain interactions between your mother and your father. Do you have any memories of when your mother and father were together at all? And now that might be stretching things, because obviously if you were around 2 years old when your parents split up.
Yeah, and I don't think I don't have a lot of memories of them together, because I don't think at that particular point I needed to. So when I think there was a reason why I had the memories following that, but up until that point, I remember some things. Like I remember standing in the crib up against the window. There was a curtain there, and I actually have pictures of me standing in this crib that I never saw until I found my dad. So it was kind of ironic to have a memory and then have a photo appear that was so close to that memory. It's a little different, but because time kind of fades things, but it was very validating in knowing that those memories are real. They weren't implanted, they weren't imagined. I actually have the photo that just kind of warmed my heart and made me feel like, wow, I do have a strong memory of that.
Yeah.
So I remember incredible. There was always something going on. They managed the apartment building that we lived in, and I remember they would knock on doors and ask for the rent. And I would knock on doors, and I'm still in diapers. And I'm knocking on doors because I'm mimicking what they're doing. And I would ask people for cookies and candy. So, I mean, everybody in this apartment complex knew me. They knew who I was. They knew when I come and knock on the door, I'm looking for something. And, we had at the time, the Green Bay Packers were spring training, and a lot of them would stay in this apartment complex. This is Hollywood, California. So we had a lot of players that were staying in the apartment complex. And I remember there was one family, and I don't remember specifically if they were actually a Green Bay Packers. So I'm not trying to say that, but I remember that there was a family that invited us over for dinner. And they asked me if I'd like to come in. They don't have cookies and candy, but they have some soul food. And so my mom was calling me, and I stuck my head through the bars, the railing, the old-fashioned iron railing. And I looked down at her and I told her, we invited for soul food. So, I mean, some of the memories I have are fun and entertaining.
Yeah.
And then there's not a lot of the bad memories. I cannot picture any of like the arguing. I remember there was a commotion one day, and that was the day she left. But I can't really picture it out in my head.
Sure. So to all intents and purposes, you were shielded from that one way or another, which is
right.
Which is good. So that's really interesting that you have those really vivid recollections. I think that's quite telling. When we sort of drill down to the rest of your story. So so you're about 2 years old. You're now sort of living with your dad. You say your dad was
living with my dad in the same apartment. So we never moved. He never tried to hide me. She left when I was about 2. We don't know if I was 2, almost 3, but somewhere in there. And then she moved into another apartment, and then eventually she left the state and moved to Colorado. And then
so geographically, how far away is Colorado from Hollywood, California?
So that's about probably 1,500, 2,000 miles. I'm guessing because I'm not even looking at a map. But
okay.
LA County or LA, Los Angeles, and Hollywood are in the southern region of California, and Colorado is kind of towards the midsection of the country. So, and it's further north, obviously, but.
Okay, so a geographical perspective from us here in the UK, that's almost twice the length of the United Kingdom. That sort of 2,000 miles or what have you. That's probably double the size of the United Kingdom. So that's not like a mother moving from London to Manchester, which would be very inconvenient to drive to. But yeah, so 2,000 odd miles away. Okay, so that's quite a distance. When did you find out she had moved? Or
I guess I didn't really know that she moved because I know that we went to see her in that apartment, and then she just disappeared.
Right.
So she left us, and I don't know that I know I wondered, where's mom, or but I wasn't as close to her from the get-go. We never had that really tight bond, not like the bond I had with my dad.
Right.
So like I'm familiar with that with him, but I'm not familiar with that with my mom, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. So for whatever reason that was, there just wasn't a bond there. And you being a baby, it's not necessarily down to you to create that or to work on that. Yeah. Okay. So
there's actually something I've just been working on, and this was work, with what I've been through, it's constant work. So things that I go through now as an adult, all of that didn't go away. It's things that I constantly have to work on still. So I'm working very closely with somebody, and we went back clear into the womb. And what we realized is that for the first 5 months that my mom was pregnant, she didn't even acknowledge that she was pregnant. She didn't know she was pregnant, or maybe she thought she was pregnant, but I don't know. But for the first 5 months, she didn't know she was pregnant by claim, or she didn't want to acknowledge. So I wasn't even acknowledged for the first 5 months of her pregnancy. And then she had me at 8 months. So we're talking about the time that a baby bonds with the mother is during the pregnancy. And it's usually instantaneously. Once the mom finds out, then it's this, all of these feelings start happening, and this mom and baby have a connection that's internal. And I don't think that I had that part. So I think that's where the bond was not developed. In a sense that most babies are. They're experiencing that bonding with their mother from the minute that they're realized that they're acknowledged.
Right. So that's an interesting parallel tangent, almost. So were you doing some sort of regression therapy to sort of work through this?
Kind of. We're going through what is it that I really feel, and kind of dissecting each of the emotions. And because I talk a lot about what I call my straight A's, I'm actually writing a book called My Straight A's.
Mm-hmm.
And most people think of it as, oh, I got straight A's in school. And my straight A's begin with abandonment.
Right.
And the second A I got was abduction. But now we're going back even further. And the first A wasn't necessarily abandonment, it was acknowledgement.
Right.
So we're lining all these up and figuring out what is it that people like me experience, and what are we carrying into our adulthood, and how is that affecting how we parent, or how we bond, or how we have meaningful relationships. How do we deal with conflict? How do we deal with stress? How do we deal with all of these things that, our body's keeping the score? And there's a book actually about that. And I totally 100% agree with that, because my body has been keeping the score as well. And there's so many things that don't just disappear. There's a myth, and I would love to bust the myth. There is no such thing as a child getting over it once they turn 18. That just does not happen.
Yeah.
There's no such thing. So it's a constant piece of baggage or constant burden that the child continues on into their adulthood with.
Yeah. I mean, it's a scar, right? It's something,
and you
that
you may not even know it.
You. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really interesting sort of concept around the issues of parental alienation. That's a very interesting dynamic, and one that only someone in your position could tell, because you are a child of parental alienation in one of the most severe ways that I've ever come across or heard about.
Yeah.
So I guess deep breath. Let's go into it.
Well, that's why I'm sharing this, because I've heard some horrific things that are said by parents, of course, because there's a high conflict there, but also by our court systems and what they think will happen, and telling parents certain things. Like, I've heard parents are told, just wait until they turn 18, they'll come back. That's a myth. That doesn't happen. That does not automatically happen. You cannot rely on the kid having the solution. And the court system is kind of imposing that on the child and providing a false hope to parents that, okay, I just have to wait a while. Because if there's no nurturing, if there's no interaction, then the child really has no need or no familiarity and no purpose to really come back and look for that, because they may be stimulated in another way. And until the child realizes that this stimulation is only the Band-Aid to make me feel like I'm a whole person, and they really start digging in and doing the work, because that's where I was. You think you're okay.
Yeah.
But if you don't know this whole half of you, you're not okay, because you don't know who you are. And that is where all of these myths are really damaging and harming the child's ability to be the whole person they were intended to be and to thrive.
Absolutely. And it's so flippant for the courts to use that as a kind of kick the can down the road.
Absolutely.
Answer for parents who,
and shame on them for insinuating.
No, totally. I mean, I think that when parents go to the family courts, most of them go with the very, very best of intentions for help and healing, and some sort of higher authority to be able to.
And they come out of adversaries.
Yeah. They're just.
And I don't want to jump off your track of what you want to talk to, but one quick little scenario that I think really paints the picture is one of the court cases we had here recently in the last year or two. I listened to it, and what I heard people actually say was that the scenario was one parent didn't want the child to have to take all that time to have to go visit the other parent. And so the argument from the attorney was, why should this poor child have to drive a whole hour to go see the other parent? And that really kind of enraged me, that was the argument. You're using the child to win an argument in court, which is wrong all in itself. And that could take me days to finish that conversation. But what I want to get down to is talking about the numbers. So the numbers, if you take my example, and we'll get into my stories that people help put the pieces together, but it took me 44 years to find my father. So if I had an opportunity as a child, if the choice was even there, that I would have had to go an hour each way to visit my other parent, if you take that away from me, that 1 hour, and that 1 hour a week, we were talking about, so 1 hour there, 1 hour back, so 2 hours a week. How many weeks are in a year? There's 52 hours. 52 weeks in a year. So now we're talking about 104 hours that I was robbed because of that, or I was robbed of visiting my dad because of this 104 hours. So then how many years did I miss because of that? So then you start seeing the numbers build, and that is where they're not calculating this correctly, because they're talking about me missing 1 hour of my life. I missed 44 years of my father. So that 1 hour, I would give anything at this point to have that 1 hour to and from. If I would have had the opportunity to see my father, that 1 hour is a small price to pay for me to continue to have access to him. So they cannot use these examples and more or less place it on the kid, using the kid as their leverage, and then cut the other parent out of their lives.
Yeah, and it's totally sensible. When you look at a solicitor, you want them to sort of put forward an intelligent argument. But if they're putting forward a weaponized, a child who's weaponized over a period of time to see the father, this should be a non-starter. It shouldn't even be able to get off the ground with, that kind of, but we just see it in family courts constantly. These silly little, he gives the kids cereal that they don't like. Right.
All that is just overcompensation from parents because they want to make their child happy. They want their child to have a good time because they want them to keep wanting to be there. So I understand why one parent might offer ice cream when mom doesn't allow it, or dad, doesn't allow this, but mom does. And that's just part of the game. When you got a divorce, you have to deal with that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. What happens at mom's house, that's what happens at mom's house.
You got to stop one-upping each other and start being, parallel parents, equal parents. Yeah. Instead of competing with each other, start working together for your child. And I know that's easier said than done in some cases. So by no means am I dismissing the conflict.
Let's just say that is always going to be the parents' arguments, but that should never be the argument within the courthouse. That should never be accepted. The tittle tattle, as it were.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They shouldn't be the participants in it. They should be, I see some areas where they use mediation and help the parents to have, find a way to still have communication that's healthy. And I think that should be implemented, but our court systems they're not equipped for that. But I didn't mean to take you down the whole side trail, but we got a lot of rabbit holes here.
It's the world over. That's the scary thing, Dawn. It's not even in your county. Exactly. It's not even in your country. It's in my country.
Global.
It's in my county, etc. It's a global issue, which is really scary when you think about it, because people either bury their heads in the sand, haven't come across it yet, or are just completely oblivious around the issue. They just don't want to tackle it. And there's a number.
Yeah.
Yeah, that there's a number of sort of conflicts around it. But yeah, okay. Well, let's get back on track here. From what I remember in our conversations, you were about 4 years old when things took a very, very dark turn in your life. So just to catch up from what we were saying before, you were around 2 when your mother left and you were living with your father.
Yep. And she had been gone for quite a while now, so I'm more or less used to her not being there. And so it was a morning that my father was already at work, and I was going to the babysitter's house. Now, mind you, everybody knew who I was at this apartment complex, and my babysitter lived there too. And I don't know what time of day it was, so I'm not sure if I was already at the babysitter's house and I was just outside playing, or there was times I remember I would go home and get something and then come back to the babysitter's house. And, this was in, early 70s. So we didn't have the concerns and rules and laws that we have today as far as children being left alone. And I wasn't really left alone. I was still within, the same neighborhood. So same vicinity. I was going back up to my babysitter's house, and that's when I heard my name, and it was a familiar sound. So when I turned around, it was my mother, and she was at the bottom of the stairs. So I turned around before I'd knocked on the door. So she had just caught me before knocking on the door or opening the door or whatever I was doing. And so I ran down to greet her, only she grabbed me and she turned around and ran. And there was a car waiting around the corner with her new husband in it. The car was running and they were ready for a quick getaway. So when she saw me going back to my babysitter's house, she jumped out of the car, ran up, called my name, grabbed me, and then ran me back to the car. And when she put me in the front seat with, in front of her, between her and her new husband, as she's pushing me in and following behind me, she's telling me, "This is your new daddy." And I can remember, bracing and trying to back up, and I'm thinking, that's not my daddy. What was going
through your mind?
Yeah, that's not my daddy. And she's telling me that this is my daddy, and I'm like, that is not my daddy. And that is a huge memory for me. And I remember he had this huge mustache and the pilot sunglasses, and I did not know what was going on. I mean, all of a sudden my mom's back, and now all of a sudden I'm being thrown into a car. So once we were in the car, they sped off, and we ended up going down towards San Diego, which is even further south, almost to the Mexico border. And we hit out on a houseboat there. So this was a very calculated, planned event. So they had resources available to them that included a car, because they flew down from Colorado, and then they flew down almost immediately after they had gotten married. So this was between March 20th, 1972 and July 16th, because July 16th I'd turned 5. So now, we're somewhere in that time frame, and the resources that they had was a houseboat, and the houseboat we stayed on for about a week until they felt safe enough, when the investigation was dying down, to move me from the houseboat to an airport. And when we got to the airport, there was a plane that was already ready to taxi and take off as soon as I was on board. So once I was on board, they closed the door, and wheels up, we were off. And that was the last time I was in California. And instantly that world became a memory. And then I was forced into this new world where everything was brand new. The only thing that was familiar to me was my mother. I had a new bed, I had new toys, new clothes, I had a new daddy now, a new house. Nothing that I had came with me. I had no comfort or no chance to say goodbye. The babysitter didn't know where I was. So this LA and Hollywood are going berserk looking for this missing child who wasn't really missing, because somebody knew where she was. But they expended all of these efforts to find a missing child. Now, this is before the Amber Alerts, and I'm believing that this was even before right before the first milk carton. Do you remember the milk cartons?
Right,
Missing
right.
children's
Well,
faces
I see
on it.
those on movies.
It was
yeah.
before that. So
Wow.
there was no real way of broadcasting this like we do today.
Yeah.
So now I'm in Colorado with all this new stuff. And then all of a sudden I had this new family. I had a new daddy, but he also had a 10-year-old daughter who was 6 years older than I am. And she was going through her own hell and didn't like her father remarrying. And then she finds out that her new father has a daughter on top of that. So from that point, for the next 8 years, I was violently abused by her to the point where she's tried to kill me. She strangled me to death, which nearly succeeded. And we can get into more of that detail in a bit, so I can keep talking about this part of the transition. But once I arrived there and all this stuff was new, I never received any help. I didn't get any therapy. I didn't get any help with the transition and understanding what just took place. Granted, I'm 4, almost 5 years old. People have the assumption that children are so resilient that they just grow and grow out of whatever their trauma was.
Yeah.
Which is not true. They internalize everything. So I believe for those 8 years that I was a punching bag, that my purpose was to be all that showed me. So the abuse and the neglect, because my mother still wasn't a motherly figure. She never was. She never knew how to be. So we didn't ever increase the bond because I was more of a nuisance and someone that she told often to go play, get away, don't come back till 6, which used to be okay to say that. I can see you have a question. So
yes, yeah. Well, so I wanted you to. So obviously there was this 2-year period between your mother leaving you and your father, and going and obviously moving up to Colorado. So what happened? What do you know of, or what was the sort of sense of why your mother would then come back and abduct you with this man?
That's a great question, because I know what I was told and I know what I've discovered. So we have 2 different sides here now where she had just gotten married to somebody that she hasn't known for very long, but she had told him that that my father was a dangerous person. And then when he found out that she had a daughter, which in his own words, in a book that he wrote, he didn't even know she had a daughter until after they were married.
Right.
So that right there is telling. And then when he found out that she had a daughter and she's telling him what a horrible person this father is, of course he's going to want to do everything he could to rescue her daughter.
That's the perfect word. He turns into a rescuer.
So he thinks he's on this rescue mission, and he sets up, because he had connections with people from, because he was a pilot. Both of my fathers were pilots. Right. So they're very similar in a lot of ways, even to their, they even look like they could maybe be brothers. They were so identical, shaped the same way, looked the same way. Both were pilots, both charismatic, both, like to have fun and entertaining, and very similar. So it didn't surprise me. So your mom had a type. She has a type. So when he found out about that, that's when they set up the plan to go down and abduct me. And when they finally got me back home, it was a couple of weeks, according to my mom, but the police finally showed up and knocked on the door. They asked her if she knew where I was. And her response was, yes, she's here with me, but she's my daughter. And so I became a possession in her mind. So the police were like, we understand that. However, you could have let her father know, because he feared that she was dead in a ditch. And not only that, you allowed the investigation to go on. We spent tons of money, tons of resources. All of this didn't need to happen had you just told somebody.
Yeah.
So she even admitted to that part. She actually told me that was her sharing that stuff with me.
Right.
And
this is conversational between the two of you.
Yeah.
At
as I was growing up, these
Right.
little bits come
Yeah.
out, and she would say, "Yeah, but you were my daughter." So she feels
still
totally.
defiant.
Yep. She feels totally validated in doing what she did because she's the mom.
Okay.
And they were never married legally, so she feels like she had the power.
Right. And did the police press any charges or anything like that?
No, they didn't press any charges, and I'm not sure why or if there was a path to press charges. Since they were never married, my father didn't think he had any legal recourse.
Right.
Even though he was on the birth certificate.
Mhm.
So, but he didn't feel like he stood a chance to fight, and especially now that I'm in another state. So she actually crossed state lines with me, which today that could be illegal, or that is illegal.
Yeah.
You can't just take your kid out of a state. So what happened then is illegal now.
Yeah.
You know, the abuse then, definitely illegal now. So she got away with it because it wasn't really prevalent back then. It wasn't spoken about. We didn't speak about stuff like this.
I don't think there's much change in people, you know, taking their chances on doing things and playing a certain type of card that sort of gets them through these situations. I mean, if you talk to anybody today, a neighbor, who do you think is going to get custody of a child when there's a divorce? It's still, the narrative is the mother, right? There's no narrative of there should be 50-50 custody, unless you happen upon a person who knows a little bit about this. It's the assumption that the mother will have the children, regardless of how she conducts herself or goes about it.
Because the role she plays, she's the nurturer, and she, you know, a lot of moms, and I can even identify with some of this having my own children, is that there's such a bond there because they came from you. And that 9-month period was an intimate period. And of course, I support fathers being involved 100%. So not to negate from that, but the fathers aren't really in that same connection, which the more involved they are in the pregnancy, the more bond and strength they build. So I love to see fathers getting right in there when their family as a family are pregnant, having that interaction and that involvement, and him participating and him knowing every moment, having communication about what's going on inside. That builds such a strong bond as well. So I'd love to see when that happens.
Yeah, well, I totally agree with that. Incidentally, I cut the cords for both of my children, and weirdly, checked the placentas, because that's what midwives do. And just to make sure that there's no internal bleeding or any ruptures or any big missing pieces from the placenta. So I was very involved in my children's
and I think that's more
and that's our experience. You know, that's a good shared experience. And I didn't do it for any other reason than I wanted my children to be as happy and as healthy and as stable as possible.
Well, and it's such an exciting time, and so I love to see fathers being in there everywhere they can and participating, and I think that's healthy. And back in the day, that wasn't really typical. The fathers weren't involved in that, and sometimes there was times where they weren't even allowed in the room. So they were removed from it. Now we're in a different age where they need to be part of it.
Yeah, which is a little bit ironic, really. The push for fathers being more involved, to being more compassionate, to being more sensitive, or what have you. What I would say is that the argument isn't necessarily that men shouldn't be as entitled to the children. It's that they should be equally entitled to the children. I'm sure you'll agree with that.
Yep.
And I don't think there's a man out there that would sort of throw weights or measurements at the importance of carrying a child, let's say, but whether that supersedes a man being in his child's life, I don't think that would ever
No,
factor.
it shouldn't be. No, it shouldn't be. And I think that that's where some of, as moms, we have to say, okay, that is not okay to say, I own this child because it came from my body. That does not give them the right to say that, because you had to have equal parts of the father. Now, literally equal parts of the father to even have the opportunity to have the child. Only half of the child came from you. Literally.
Yeah.
The other half came from the father. So as far as belonging, there is no ownership of the child. There is guidance.
Yeah.
You are there as a role model, as someone that guides the child, but the child owns their life.
Yeah.
Even when they're small, you just have to guide them into being the best adult that they could possibly be. And that's the goal of a parent, not over who owns them and what they need to believe, or, they're going to have their own mind someday. And someday they may decide that what you did, they don't approve of, and it may backfire on you.
Yeah.
It may not have the relationship you think you have, because they found out it was based on lies.
Yeah.
So it's a very dangerous game you're playing. Yeah, it's a very dangerous game.
No, I totally agree. So let's go back to Colorado, if that's okay with you. So
Absolutely.
You're now integrated into this new regime, this new system. How's that working out for you? How are things like you're moving into your sort of early adolescence, so you're 10, you're 12 years old. What's going on in your life around that sort of age?
Well, like I mentioned, I have this stepsister who hates me and wants to get rid of me at any means necessary. And I felt like I never understood why my mom bothered to come and get me, because I didn't feel like I was in a circle of love or I was in a thriving environment. And when I was being abused and threatened within an inch of my life, nothing ever happened. There was no justice for me whatsoever. So justice is a key word here. But I was never vindicated. I was never protected like I should have been protected. Neither one of not my mom or my new stepfather, new daddy, ever protected me from what I refer to as my demon. And I have reasons to call her my demon, because I could see her literally change before my eyes. And I recognized it. I knew when the things were about to go down, and I was in big trouble. So the last time she's attacked me from behind, she's she sat on top of me, pinned my arms down, along the side of my body with her legs. And she's got my hair wrapped in her hands by my ears and just shoving my head into the ground over and over again. And, so that was throughout the 8-year period. But the last time that she ever did anything with me was, and I did some stuff that I have no idea why I did it, but she had a very light complexion and she always burned. She never really was able to get a suntan because she was strawberry blonde and very fair skinned. So it's her senior year. She's getting ready to take her finals, and she's outside. She's setting up a lawn chair, and she's got her books there, and she's going to sit out in the sun and study for her finals. And I thought, well, that's pretty funny. You're just going to burn. And I'm at the sliding glass door in the back of the house, and I just lock it. I have no idea what come over me, because I know better. You don't mess with a person like her. There is no fun and games with a person like her. But all of a sudden I felt like locking her out of the house as a joke, I would have never left it locked.
Mm.
When she came up to the glass, it was like the alien creature that came up and was breathing right in front of Sigourney Weaver. That's what I felt like. Like she was at that glass and she was about to attack me. And it freaked me out. And I knew all of a sudden that I had just made a very bad mistake. And she comes around to the front of the house and she is breaking in the entire front door. It was a solid oak door and oak frame. And she literally took door and all frame and laid it in. The whole frame, not just the door, the whole frame, boom, into the house.
She was
oh yeah. And I'm running out into the garage.
I don't mean to laugh, but this sounds hilarious. Like,
well, you think it was like a door. It's like, man, the whole door.
Yeah.
So I get on my bike. I'm in the garage and I can hear her coming. And so I take my bike and I go out and I'm trying to make a break for it because I'm dead. I'm dead if I stay in that house. Well, she must have realized what I was doing because she went back out the front door and caught me at the corner of the house. And she lifted me up off of my bike by my neck.
Oh my God.
Pulled me up off the bike and she was crushing my throat. And luckily I had my pinky caught up in there. So I had to sprain pinky afterwards. But I don't know if that helped. But what I remember is her face was not her normal face. And I actually have pictures that I just found recently that almost knocked me off my chair when I saw it. But there's a picture of her in this dysmorphed face. And all I saw as the light was going out was it was just closing in, and it was just those demon eyes as the lights went out for me. And I had already expended my last breath. And it was done. It was over at that point, except our parents just pulled into the driveway at this particular moment. And when she snapped out of that, she dropped me. And when she dropped me, the impact made me gasp for that last life-saving breath of air.
Jeez.
So I heard, and there's a couple other instances in the past where I was thinking about not wanting to exist. And that voice came to me and said, you're going to be needed someday. That same voice came to me that day too. And it said, get up and run. So I don't know how, all I can remember seeing is grass. And I was just struggling to get my balance and get away. So I managed to get away and I went and hid at a neighbor's house. And I was petrified. I mean, she just tried to kill me. So they finally coaxed me into coming home, and they sat us down at the table. So now I'm sitting at the table with this demon that just tried to kill me, side by side.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking she's gonna get it.
Right.
And they handed us a piece of paper each and a pencil. And my stepfather says, I don't want to hear a word. Just write it. And he walked out of the room. And I'm like, you saw what happened, according to what I had just told, because I didn't see them pull up, but I heard they were already talking about this as they were trying to get me to come home.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and you want me to write it? First of all, I have a sprained pinky. I can't write because my hand hurts.
Yeah.
So I was so angry.
So this is just
she was
yet
getting away
another
with it.
injustice. Another one of those things. So you've had.
She got away with it. Yep, he was out there fixing the front door for her that she knocked in, and he was putting the door back together. And that was it. She didn't get punished. Nothing happened. There was no police report. There was nothing. I was there just to fend for myself once again. So, yeah, I at this point, I just didn't think my life had value. Obviously, it didn't matter, and it definitely didn't seem like it had any value. Yeah. So there was times after this that's the mentality that I had, that I really have no purpose. And going to church, they would say, oh yeah, you need to find your purpose. You're going to go out there and live your purpose. And I'm like, what is my purpose? My purpose here is being bullied and tortured and, nearly killed for over the last 8 years. And so we moved back to California at this point. She went off to college, and I'm thinking, I am finally free. I still have a mom that doesn't really engage or connect, or, she's not nurturing.
Mm-hmm.
And Larry was never
no
home.
one's trying to kill you.
Yeah. The stepdad was never home. He was a pilot and often flying. And so he'd be gone 3 weeks to however many weeks, months sometimes, depending on where he was flying. So he was rarely home. But we moved to California because he had another job opportunity. So this was my 8th grade year. And it wasn't when I got into high school, 9th grade, I started meeting new friends. They were friends at church. And then we were going to the same high school. So we were friends in high school as well. And I started telling my story. I started talking about what I had just went through. I started telling them I was abducted when I was a child. And they're like, no, you weren't. That's crazy. They're looking at this perfect family image, a photo of the perfect family. They see my mom and her husband, and they think, oh my gosh, everybody thought they were the perfect couple and that we were just the happiest family. And I'm thinking, no, we've never really been that. Never. I've never, ever experienced that. So the more I shared with them what happened to me, I started getting bullied again. And they were also vicious. And they also threatened to kick my butt, or, it was almost as traumatic because these were supposedly my friends. Yeah.
You've chosen these people to interact with and share
with. And they
with.
didn't believe me. They refused to believe me. Any adults that were involved, like from church, they didn't believe me. And these girls bullied me to the point where it was very traumatic. They ganged up on me about it. And they also influenced their parents at church, which also created this reputation that I had, that I was just a troublemaker and I lied a lot. So I'm now being labeled someone that can't be trusted, someone that doesn't know what she's saying. Nobody really dove in to try and help understand what I was trying to say. And as children, we don't know how to communicate very well. So we know we feel something, but we're not exactly sure what it is that we feel. And we don't know how to express it. So here's that example of, I'm trying to share my life, my experiences with people who have had a near perfect childhood.
Yeah.
Like in my eyes, it's like pristine perfect. I would love to have had a childhood where both parents were there and everybody was love and, having fun, singing, dancing, laughing. I didn't really feel like I had that. So finding a purpose at this point was where I stood at a counter one day, and there was a knife on the counter. And I remember thinking, what do it feel like to just not exist anymore? And I didn't have thoughts of actually using the knife, but I would just like to not exist. And I stood there in silence, and like the room was dark, or like my eyes were closed or something. And that's when I heard that voice that says, you're going to be needed someday. It was a very familiar voice because I'd heard it before. The one that told me to get up and run. It told me, you're going to be needed someday. And that filled me with hope. And that hope is what kept me going. And hope kept me alive. It kept me here. And I heard it one other time when I was still struggling with relationships. I was a little older, and I had a souped up GT Mustang, and I was taught how to drive it by race car drivers. I was a trophy girl. I was out having fun, but the relationship was falling apart, and I was struggling to figure out, where am I going? What am I doing? Why am I here? All these questions started coming back again, and not knowing how to fix what was wrong or what was broken. It was easy just to I guess it's time to leave again. And as I'm driving to work one day, I'm passing all these trees, and I'm driving 140 miles an hour on the back roads. And there was a train that I needed to beat because the train crosses my road 7 times. And if I get stuck by the train at one intersection, I will be stopped at every single one of those other intersections, and I'd be late for work. So I had to drive fast enough to beat the train. And as I'm driving, I'm watching these trees just flying by me. They're just like boom, 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 boom. And I'm thinking, which one would I hit? Because it would be really easy right now. Which one would I hit? And that voice came again, and it said, you're still going to be needed. It's not time. So again, that hope comes back, and I'm thinking, I have a purpose. There's something out here for me. I just need to find it. I need to figure it out. What's my purpose? So again, hope kept me alive. And I left that situation and, moved forward. I ended up moving back to Florida and eventually got married, had children, and that relationship starts falling apart because, again, I still don't know how to deal with conflict. I still don't know how to have a meaningful relationship. And one of the things that my stepfather told me on my wedding day that it still blows me away to this day. Like, how could you give someone such horrible advice? And especially someone like me who I don't know how to have a relationship with myself or understand myself, be confident with myself, and then you tell me something like this. So he tells me, whatever you do, you need to always protect his ego. His ego is very, men are fragile, and you need to protect that. Always be there for him.
Right.
And so now I'm like, oh my gosh, what the heck is that? And now I'm walking on eggshells in my marriage because I don't understand what he meant. I don't understand, why do I need to protect him exactly? Yeah. I don't even know how to protect myself. So I just spent the last 20 some odd years not knowing how to protect myself.
Yeah.
And I got to protect him.
And this guy who's ripped you away from your father is telling you this sort of like bizarre advice that he should actually be having a chat with this guy. If you want to talk about egos, hello, stepdad, step up. Go and talk to my new husband.
Tell him to protect
him. Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm trying so hard to live up to this, and I'm thinking I want to stay, and I end up having my second child. I'm like, I don't want to have another child with him. It's not that I didn't want the child. I don't want to have a child with him. I already had one with him. I was already a stepmom to his daughter. I became a mom overnight. The minute we decided to be together, I was instantly his mom. And this was by design. I was selected because I was definitely not his type. I was selected, though, because I had, I guess, characteristics that he thought would be beneficial to step in and be a daughter to his mom, a mom to his daughter.
So he saw a vulnerability in you. A
vulnerability. So I have my second child, and I'm thinking, I'm just getting more and more depressed at this point. And we've been together for quite a while now, and I'm not happy at all. And I'm solely responsible for these children, even while married, because he didn't do diapers. He didn't do babysitting. And these are his words. He changed his daughter's diapers, but he would never change his son's diapers. And I thought, okay, I think that's weird. And again, I don't know enough at this point to really come out and question him. And oh my gosh, heaven forbid I do, because I'm not used to that. I'm not used to speaking my mind or using my voice and telling him, you're crazy, man. What the heck is wrong with you? Yeah. None of that ever came out. And I would have reactions, but those were reactions. Those were not responses. Those were not, this is what I stand for. These are my values. And why are you doing this? It was, whatever it took to not make him angry. And that was how my marriage was.
So were the words echoing through there when you came across these instances when you wanted to sort of scream?
Yes.
Was your stepdad's words echoing, like, protect his ego, and did that suppress you? Did that push you down?
I felt, because I felt set up to fail. I felt like I was not I didn't understand what my role was in as being a wife, or what I was supposed to do. And, being raised in the church that I was raised in, it was very, it's very patriarchal, which I think a lot of religions are. That's why I'm not very religious. I'm very spiritual. I have my own connection, but it has nothing to do with religion. Mm-hmm. And that whole method, or that whole, what is the word I'm looking for? Just by
ideology.
Design. Yeah, the whole thing is like, it's designed for the men in that situation. And that's kind of what he was teaching me, that I needed to do everything that I was supposed to do for my husband. Mm-hmm. And it really had set me up to fail, because it didn't protect me, and it didn't give me a voice, and it didn't make me build my confidence whatsoever. Yeah. And again, here I have no value, and my life really has no value still. And I'm still thinking, what the heck? So I'm in this severe state of depression, and I'm a functioning depression, or, depressed person, where I decide, okay, I need to get a job, because we were living not even paycheck to paycheck. We were always in the red, and we couldn't even pay the electric bill. So he would run an extension cord to our neighbor's garage and kind of steal his I keep our refrigerator on.
Oh, wow.
So I was like, this is not, I don't want to raise my kids like this. I don't want them to think this is okay. So parts of me at least knew instinctively, this isn't good. And I don't want my kids to grow up like this. I want my kids to thrive. I want them to have the life I never had. And I see it out there. I've seen it in all my friends, even the ones that bullied me, even the ones that, attacked me quite often. I don't want my kids to have this life. And I don't want them to think that it's okay for them to treat their wives like this. And I started thinking about, if going forward, are they going to turn into him? And I don't want them to turn into him. I don't want, and not that I don't want them to be connected to their father. I just didn't want them having a relationship that was emulating what we had. So I decided I needed to leave. But, getting the job and stuff like that, I couldn't support myself. So I went and I started working for Home Depot, because that was the only way I could even afford to go to work without paying someone else to watch the kids, because, again, he doesn't babysit. So we came to an agreement, though, that if I went to work late enough and I got the kids in bed, then, I could go to work. That he would be okay staying home with them if they were already in bed, because he didn't do that either. Okay. So I was at work. I worked nights at Home Depot, pretty labor field type job. And I was exhausted when I came home, but I had to get up and, I had to stay up long enough to get my stepdaughter to school. Yeah. And I had to take care of all of the, all the kids' stuff in the morning. So I didn't get to come home and just go to bed and sleep the day. Yeah. I had to come home and take care of the kids still. So one night I called to check on the kids just to see how things were going. And he was drunk, which was a very common occurrence. He was drunk quite often. And he told me I left the kids over at so-and-so's house. And I'm like, you left them over with some guy that we're all hearing that he is a pedophile? Oh. And you left my kids there? So I quit my job on the spot, and I went to pick up my kids. And when I got there, what I saw on the screen, and my stepdaughter was awake. She had just sat up and looked at the screen. And I was mortified with what she had seen. And she asked questions about that later. And I was like, this, I can't keep doing this. Yeah. There's no parental value. We don't even have the same types of parenting styles. We had no connect. I didn't even ask the question before I got married. And that's an important thing too, is being able to make sure that you are compatible. We were totally not compatible. So I finally told him, you need to stop drinking, and I'm going to Colorado, moving back in with my mom and dad. I'm taking the boys, but I'm going to go to school so that I can get a good job, because I'm used to having good jobs. I had good paying jobs where I could afford a Mustang GT. I was, pretty self-independent. I was independent, but now I'm like I'm living below poverty at this point. And we're stealing from our neighbor to keep our fridge turned on. That's like unacceptable.
Yeah.
So I told him, you need to stop drinking beer every day. And the next day he comes home with Captain Morgan and Coke. So I'm pretty sure that's my message. That was the answer. And so I moved back to Colorado. So now I'm back at mom and dad's house. And,
back into the layer.
Yeah, back into it. And I was still depressed. And, I was going to school now. I was starting to get a job right out of school. Things were starting to work out, but I'm still depressed. So I went to a therapist, and I forget which one can actually write the prescription. Psychotherapist?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So I went to him, and he heard about my marriage, and he heard about some of my childhood, because I never talked to him about any of the other stuff. But he says, well, as a mom, I see that you're setting goals, you're making plans, you're getting your children what they need, and you're protecting them. He's like, I don't have any problems with what you're doing. He's like, but you have too many toxic people in your life, and you need to get rid of them. And of course, he named my husband, and it's like, you need to cut off the communication as much as possible. Only focus on what you need the conversations that need to happen, and nothing else. That's it. You do not need to talk to him. You can let the kids talk to him, but you do not need to talk to him. I'm like, okay, I can live with that. Now someone's telling me what I need to do, and I can follow those directions. Yeah. And then he says, secondly, and he starts writing on this prescription pad, and he writes, move out of your mother's house. He says, she's toxic. You need to get away from her. And so at that point I thought, holy cow, this must be really bad for someone to actually write me a prescription to move away from my mother. And at that point I started thinking, I can be totally independent. And he kind of gave me that nudge that I needed.
What a great vindication for him to recognize what was going on with your mom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally validated. So I started doing some work and started, getting into the job, actually making friends, and did a little bit of dating, but I kind of ran into guys that were, either, it was Match.com in the beginning, and like, okay, that was not you. I had some really interesting guys there. And then I dated somebody that ended up being very abusive, and I didn't even realize the situation I was in, and ended up moving back down to Florida for 5 months. And we lived in this Tarpon Springs area. And what was interesting is at this particular time, this was in 2001, 2002, and I just left in 2000, January 1st, 2000 is when I left my husband. So I'm back shortly after, and I'm living in Tarpon Springs. What's ironic is that so did my dad. My real father was living in Tarpon Springs at the same time. Now, Tarpon Springs is a small town in Florida. Wow. And we had to have passed each other on the road. We probably maybe passed each other in the grocery stores, but we were around each other for 5 months. Was he in your mind at
that point as well?
Huh?
Like, because there must have been a point where you've gone, like, I just give up. I give up with my dad or what have you. And you go through year after year after year of normality, etc. So how did that?
That's a good question, because even clear back to when I was in the home at the age of 4 to 12, and I kept wanting him to come and rescue me. Mm-hmm. I constantly thought about him. Why aren't you coming around? Why can't you come and see what's going on here? Come and get me. Take me away from this hell. So I had those thoughts when I was really young. And then as an adult, I thought, I'm going to find my dad. I'm going to go and find him, because I don't remember the person that my mom paints. I wasn't allowed to talk about him. She forced me to call her husband daddy. If I did talk about him, she'd tell me something horrific, that he was this horrible person that people wanted to kill to scare me from wanting to be around him. And at some point I was thinking, he hasn't bothered to come. And I asked her, did he ever send me birthday cards or call me or Christmas? She's like, no, he doesn't do anything like that. He just stopped engaging altogether. He doesn't care. So I started believing if he doesn't care about me, that's why he's not bothering to come. So I would have the ups and downs where I would think that, and then I would think, but that's not who I remember. So I would try really hard to not think that way, but then couldn't help it because there's no action.
Yeah.
I have nothing to compare it to besides the fact that he's not there and he hasn't tried to find me, according to what I see. So as an adult, I thought, I need to find him. And when I was real little, before my mom even left, they were working for Sammy Davis Jr. They were, they were doing work with him. They were actually making some films, some videos with him. And that was stuff that they were doing that I think that's partly what my mom was trying to conceal and from her new husband. So that's why this whole story about how he's this horrible person came into play, because she doesn't know that I know about that world. And I actually have photos. I have the images. I have negatives. I have all of these pictures of this. And I would send her a picture and say, look at this. You look so pretty. And she'll say, oh, is that me? And I'm like, come on. You know that's you. But
okay, well, so right, I'm struggling to follow that little snippet there. So she was working in Hollywood on films with people like Sammy Davis Jr. whilst she was with your husband?
With her husband.
While she was with your father.
Yeah. Right. So the two of them worked for Sammy Davis Jr. And they did other things, like my dad would, he was in charge of Sammy's guns because he used all his own guns in all of his Western films. Right. So they had to like carry these guns, to and from the set. And my dad was the only person allowed to touch them.
Right.
He trusted him to manage the gun, the vault, and all that. So they did that, but they also were involved in shooting some of these films. And
so why didn't she want to be associated with that? Why was that a problem with her new husband? Because
they were a little promiscuous.
Right.
So they call it like soft porn, which is on TV. It's not like porn, full-blown porn, but today we see what used to be rated R is, because it's considered that. So it's not like the dirty side of that or the that side of it. But I think she still has maybe she regrets doing it. I don't know, but she became this religious person. So now it's even more detrimental to conceal that.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah,
and
so she's just pushed that way down.
Yeah. And honestly, I never saw anything that was like way out there as far as her or him. I saw some others, but it wasn't them. Thankfully. But I think that's just a side that she's trying to conceal, and she doesn't want anybody to know about it. And I think that's why she has this story that she's created and had me believing, had her husband believing. Everybody's believing this story because she really doesn't want anybody to know about this.
Right.
So.
Okay. Yeah. So you're in the same town as your dad.
I'm in the same town.
And you've run away effectively from that town, from the husband that you had at that point.
Okay. So let me clarify that. So I had left my husband in January 1st of 2000, we were still going through a divorce. So when I moved to Tarpon Springs with a fiance, I'm still trying to get a divorce.
Right.
And I came down here because Florida had the jurisdiction, and being here kind of helped me talk face to face with my attorney. And in the meantime, this fiance had essentially isolated me from everybody, and I didn't even see it happening.
Right.
It just totally didn't see it happening. And then I was late coming home one day because I was going to pick up furniture that someone was giving us for free. And Florida has some really congested I'm sure you can understand really bad traffic that could take you hours just to go 30 miles.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm stuck in traffic and I can't get home. And he had called me earlier that day and wanted me to be home by 8 o'clock. I'm like, well, it's 19. I can't, if it's traffic jammed, there's nothing I can do about that. So I was 15 minutes late.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got home, he was visually angry and took off in my car and left. So I'm unloading this free furniture with my friend by ourselves now so that she can take her truck back. And then I still have to go get my car because that was, we left the car down there just to have the truck. So he comes back not long after that, and he gets a little violent. And he starts throwing dresser drawers at me. He bursted a blood vessel in my arm from grasping me. And this is the first experience I've ever had with a male having this kind of abuse towards me.
Yeah.
And it totally threw me off. The police shows up. There's this whole report. My kids witnessed all of it. And I thought, oh gosh, I can't do this either. I can't have my kids witnessing that at all. So now I'm looking to leave, not realizing my father was still living in the same place. So when I left in 2000, still in Tarpon Springs, and I was just living 20, 30 miles south of it. I may not have gone to Colorado. I may have stayed in Florida to get to know him.
Had you have known
Had I known, if I would have been looking, I had kind of thought about it, and maybe that's why I thought about it, because maybe I sensed him. And so my ex-husband knows about this whole thing about me trying to find my dad. He knew all that. And so when I was having the moments of wanting to find him, I was sensing him as being close, because he was literally that close. So I moved away, and then I moved back, and I'm still close to him.
Yeah. So I take it that you've never had his address or anything like as simplistic as that to kind of like go, oh, I'll go and.
No.
Like, did he move from those apartments and things at some point? Because you said he stuck around the apartments that he was living at.
Okay.
When you were a
let
child.
me give you a little bit of a insight on him. After the abduction, he lived in that apartment for a while after that. He had met his wife, who is his wife now, shortly after I was taken. And he was not interested in having any other children at all. He was like, nope, I'm done. He had just lost his daughter. But if you think about his own childhood, he lost his mother when he was only 14 years old, and he never met his father. So he was parentless at 14. And, he aged out at 18, and that's when he went down to Florida and met my mom, and, then we go from there. So at this point, he's like, I've lost the two most important women in my life. 3, actually, if you want to count my mom, because he was really in love with my mom.
Sure.
So 3 women now he's lost them, and he's not interested in going through that pain ever again. So as far as he's concerned, we're just going to have fun, and we're not having any kids. And it took her 12 years to get him to realize that she's not going anywhere. And then they decided to start having a family. So I have 3 half brothers from them, that they were raised knowing who I was.
Yeah.
And as they grew up, they started looking for me. They started to try and help him find me, but they didn't know what my name was anymore. So it was almost impossible. And with an adoption, illegal at best, they still were not able to uncover that name. So they weren't able to, but I became a private investigator and started using those resources so that I could hopefully find him. And I'm going to pause for just a second, because I think my screen's paused. Can you see me?
Yes, it has been scuffling out, but I've been able to get the gist of what you were saying.
Okay, there, you're back now too. So, okay, so now where was I?
So you were
I
saying
got
that
distracted watching the screen.
Yes. So you became a private detective essentially, and you use those resources. Yeah, there is a little bit of a delay.
I wanted to figure out how to find somebody. Yeah, it is. It's kind of pixelating too. Give it a second.
Sure, 1 hour.
Should I try it now?
Yeah, go for it.
It's okay. So I wanted to use the resources and learn how to find somebody. So I started digging in on being a private investigator, and I had found him a couple of times and sent something, but it would never, I'd never get anything back. And then finally in 2008, my mom finally gave me his birthday. So the only thing I ever had with him was his name and a picture and my birth certificate. That's it. And it just said that he was 21 years old when I was born. So I knew approximately his birth date, but I didn't have an exact. And if you look up Patrick Charles McCarty, there are so many Patrick McCartys in this world, thousands and thousands and thousands of them. And I've talked to about 20 or 30 of them. Some of them were too old, some of them were too young, some of them lived in different countries. I'm like, oh, this is like a needle in a haystack. And so I found, in some of my research, I found somebody that fit the age range with the birth date that she had just given me.
Right.
And he was in California. So all of these things started lining up. And I found a marriage license and it had somebody's name on it. And I thought, okay, so maybe that's his new wife. So I sent a birthday card because now I know his birthday. And so I sent him a birthday card and told him, I'm looking for my biological father. And my search has led me to you. I'm sorry if this is an imposition, but I'd really like to get some information about family history. So I kind of left it very casual. And it came back as no longer at this address, which means he was there.
Yeah.
I just missed him. So I kind of had a little hope at that point that I'm on to something here.
Yeah.
But then, you work really hard, and then you kind of give up again, like it's fruitless.
Yeah.
So
how old were you when you were doing that? How old were you when you were doing that?
That was in 2008, after I did my final on the human trafficking and found out that, found the people that were just like me. Right. So I'm starting to clue in on what's been going on. And so now I'm re-energized to find him again.
Yeah.
And, so I did it for probably another year or so. I really dug in and tried to find him. And then I'd be worn out. And I'd stop for a little while. Yeah. And then in 2016, now my kids were not allowed to have their own social media accounts growing up. Criminal justice, cybersecurity. Yeah, no, not happening. Right. So they didn't have the exposure early on. And it wasn't until they became adults that we all decided to go ahead and get Facebook accounts. And I started looking up Patrick McCarty's on Facebook. And I'm thinking, I don't know why I didn't think about this before, I never thought about, everything I heard about Facebook was like, eh. So I start looking up Patrick McCarty's, and I find so many of them, but there was one that had a dog for a profile picture, and I just felt like I needed to see that person. So I'd go through and I'd look at all the photos. I'm like, this could possibly be the guy, because he kind of looks like the older version of this one photo that I had. This could be him. So I sent him messages, but because we're not friends, it goes into that hidden inbox that you don't see all the time. So he never saw it. And I thought, oh my gosh, I can't give up on this. So I started going through his friends, and I noticed that the same person on that marriage license that I had just found, or back in 2008, so now it's 2020, December of 2015, and rolling right into January, I found her name on his friends list, and I'm like, this has got to be him. So I started going through their friends list, and there's no way I was going to reach out to her. I didn't want to shock her because I don't know what she knows at this point. So I start digging, and I found a name on there that had both of them on his friends list that was the age that could be one of their children, and his name was there. So I reached out to him, and I told him, my name is Dawn, and I'm looking for my biological father, and I'm trying to find out more information about family history, etc., blah, blah, blah. And he's like, yeah, I have a sister named Dawn, but we haven't seen her in a while. And I'm like, well, because I was abducted. And he goes, yeah, that's the story I was told. And I'm like, no way. And I'm almost in disbelief.
Yeah.
And I'm just kind of staring at the screen, and I'm calling for my son. I'm like, get in here. And I said, read this to me, because I want to make sure I actually read that right. And he's like, yeah, I think you just found who is this guy? I'm like, I don't know, but he's friends with this guy, and I think that guy is my father. And so we're like, so maybe is he my brother? Possibly. Mm-hmm. So I said, would he be interested in speaking to me? So within 5 minutes, I had his phone number, and I heard his voice for the first time in 44 years. It was that fast. That connection was the connection. So then all of a sudden I had this family. I have 3 brothers, a niece, and stepmom. And she had saved one of my baby photos, and she actually put it in their family Bible so that they would always know where it was, because she always felt that we would find each other. Yeah. So she grabbed that picture, they took a picture of it, and they texted it to me. And that just was like, whoa, things just became real. I had never seen a picture of myself before the age of 4. Because when I was gone, we didn't take any pictures. So I never knew what I looked like as a baby. I didn't know any of that. So when I was getting my doing the thesis, and I met that group of other people that were also abducted, and we were part of that study, that's where the missing poster comes in, that we all had to get our missing posters and hold them up. And I had to make mine up. There was a couple ladies there that we had to make ours up because we didn't have that. So I didn't have a picture of myself to use. So I had to find one online, and I found one that I thought, okay, well, that looks like something I might have looked like. So I used that. And you can see it on my profile on Facebook now. I've
seen it. I've commented.
Yeah,
on it.
It's like, wow, that was pretty dang close. Yeah. And so, that's the whole missing poster piece of it. But
I just think that's so like mind blowing. I mean, what must have happened when you've read this message back, and it's like, yeah, that's like what we're told, right? My sister was abducted.
Yeah. So when I started seeing the pictures, it started really sinking in. Like, this is it. And I thought, we're on the phone together, and we're like, total disbelief. You can imagine, like, what do you say? And I'm like, the only thing I could say was, hey. And that's all I can muster. In fact, I have a video about that. I don't know if you've seen the video that I created last year. And it's with the song, the music, and it's called Hey, actually. And it is about a father-daughter finding each other again. So it's kind of ironic that the song fits my life.
Yeah.
So I got permission from the artists to use the song as the video. So you'll have to watch that later too.
Send me the link, and we'll put it on here.
Yeah. Okay. It's actually bit.ly/just said hey.
Right.
I'll get you. All right. I'll send you. To be sure.
Send it over.
So we're both sitting there like, well, how do we know this is it? It's like, we both know that this has got to be it, but how do we know for sure? Because, most people want a DNA test. They want to prove that, you're part of the family. And I'm like, I don't need a DNA test. I just need you to answer one question, because only my biological father would know the answer to this question. And he goes, okay, what's that? I said, which celebrity did we hang around with when I was 2? And he goes, oh, you mean Sammy? And I'm like, that's the one. And that's why I told the story about Sammy, because that was very significant in me establishing the fact that I truly found my biological father. And I always knew that Sammy would help me find him. I just didn't know that's how he would help me find him.
Yeah.
So, yeah, full circle. All these little bits and pieces that may not make sense in the beginning, when I start tying them together, they all have a significant part in that reunification. And now we knew 100%, no DNA test needed, that we finally found each other. And we started to heal and grow, and he was sharing, what he went through. I was sharing what I went through. Of course, what I went through really hurt him. It was really hard for him to hear this and to listen to this, because he was against it, all of it. He never gave up his parental rights. They were just taken, and he didn't even know it. They never contacted him. Yeah. So the adoption was granted because of an affidavit that my mom completed that kind of fudged the details that weren't true. And the state of Oregon, because that's where we were living at the time when my stepdad adopted me, they didn't follow their own state statute and investigate. They were required by their own law to investigate for 60 days before they allowed this adoption. Had they done their job, had they followed their own laws and their own criteria, I would have been reunited with my father at the age of 8. The age of 8. So the state
failed,
let me down. And I hold them equally responsible for this whole catastrophe.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it. Firmly lays at their doorstep. From what you said, and if they're not going to do their due diligence and what have you, then you're gonna.
And this is why I don't believe. This is why I don't believe in accusations being taken, and that's what our family courts do. Is they take an accusation and they decide if they believe it or not believe it, and they make rulings against it. I will stand up every single time and disagree with how they do that, because that's what happened to me, and I lost my father because of that decision. They didn't make sure she was right. They just took her word, because what she had was somebody that was willing to step up. But what they're not thinking about is, I don't give a crap about what the state thinks a father is. I'm the child, and I know who my father was. I don't need the state telling me who they're going to assign as my father. It's not up to them. They don't get to make that call. What they're doing is replacing parents that should never be replaced. And that is a disgrace when it comes to what the trauma and the outcome of the child.
That's absolutely true. That's absolutely right. The way government's reaching into families is just so draconian and barbaric.
Yeah, I think maybe initially they thought that they were helping, but it's gotten to be much more than that. Now it's actually an income. Now they make money off of child support. They make money off of families breaking up. So they have no interest in keeping families together.
No. And can you see the correlation between what the courts did and how they acted and how the government acted by sort of sidestepping and not quite getting the full story, and how your stepdad acted and was sort of manipulated to be a rescuer for your mother in the same respect? So she's gone to him and said, this is when he asked, obviously, do you have children or what have you, or, when she came to him and said, I've got a child, after they had then sort of got married, which is dubious in itself. The correlation between that and how the courts think what they're doing is helping as well. So he's come out and he's rescued you in his mind from some sort of peril.
He was totally validated in stealing another man's child. based off of what he was told. He felt that he was in the right to steal someone's child. The courts feel that they are justified in doing the same thing based on what they were told. So they take a mother who comes in who's super emotional, and maybe I don't want to say mother, a parent that's super emotional and maybe a little dysregulated. And I think at times the court system says, well, we don't want to disrupt that, so we're just going to rule this way because they're going to be able to handle it. And so instead of making decisions based on what's best for the family, they're making decisions on what they can stay out of.
Yeah.
And what they can just push through. It's like, okay, we're just going to say this because then that gets them out of our courtroom. We don't want that.
The path of least resistance.
Yeah, and they're not capable of understanding the psychological events that are happening. They're not capable of understanding the detrimental effects that happen to a child based on their decisions. When they make these kinds of decisions, they're thinking it's just today. But for the child, it's every single day for the rest of their lives that's affected. Yep. And I'm a prime example of it. That decision that particular court made on that day where they granted and they waived the investigation and they granted the adoption, every single day since that day, they've been involved in my life.
Yeah.
And I am determined that I'm going to reverse that adoption. And I'm going to replace my father as my legal father. Because right now, I'm still not a member of my own family. Yeah. Right now, I am just a relative, but not legally. I am not legally a sister. I am not legally an aunt. And I'm not legally my father's daughter. Because I'm, in the eyes of the law, they say I'm somebody else's daughter. And I just found this out actually in, I think it was 2019, when I found out that I knew that there was something that had happened, but I had never seen adoption paperwork. I knew that my name was changed. I had a birth record ID card, but not a birth certificate. My mom only gave me my primary birth certificate. So I didn't know that this actually went through the courts. So when I tried to get a copy, someone requested a copy of my birth certificate and they needed a certified copy. Well, I'm not giving them the one and only one I have. So I requested a new one and they said, well, that's not who you are. I'm like, what? And she's like, yeah, that's no longer your identity. I'm like, but I have a birth certificate right here. She's like, that's invalid. And I'm like, what do you mean it's invalid? It's the only birth certificate I've ever had. And she goes, no, you have a different one. Were you adopted? And it was like, click. I'm like, oh, there's a birth certificate for that? And she's like, yeah, whenever you're adopted, you're issued a brand new birth certificate. It's like the other one never existed. I have a huge problem with that. I have a huge problem with that. I think that children deserve to know who their biological parents are whenever they want, so long as the biological parent wants to be found as well. I'm not saying that we should just not consider, but they have the right to know who they came from and not this red tape that our government conceals to protect the adoptive parent. We're not protecting the child.
It's just another minefield that's been created, isn't it? It's just another
so
minefield.
I finally convinced her. I'm like, look, my legal name is, and I didn't tell you the name, the part about my father naming me, Dawn Enderia McCarty.
Right.
So I'm telling her my legal name is Dawn Enderia McCarty. And so whatever name you have on that birth certificate no longer exists. And I do not recognize that as my legal parent at this point, because now I do not recognize that I was adopted and that I was ever a stepdaughter, because his family never accepted me. They rejected me 100%, would not include me as part of the family that I was adopted into.
Yeah.
So there again, there's more rejection, more abandonment, more of all that stuff going on there. So she's like, well, I understand you changed your name, but until this is reversed, there's nothing we can do about it. So I got her to put on my new birth certificate that she has with my real dad. But at the bottom, they have this but clause. She was adopted by so-and-so. And so this birth certificate cannot be used as a valid form of identification. I'm like, wow.
Oh my
Wow.
gosh. How
So
crazy. So
now
what are you doing
I'm
about that now then?
I want to, and of course COVID hit, so things kind of like went downhill. Courts weren't open; they're not taking cases, so I haven't been able to do it. I wanted it done last year, so this year I'm going to start it up again, where I can do whatever I can to reverse the adoption, because I am an adult now and I can say who my father is. I met him, I know him, and the way that whole adoption was done should have never been done that way.
Yeah.
So if I can find an attorney that will represent me in Oregon, that's got the what do I want to say? got the strength to stand up to the court and say you were wrong,
the conviction,
and help me reverse it. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be amazing. I really hope that happens for you, because it's a farce. It's farcical for that to ever be the case. How can your that's a massive human rights, like an identity is.
It was absolutely. It was my identity.
Stolen.
And that was my biggest struggle throughout my entire life, until I realized in 2016. It wasn't until after I found my father that I realized I had been living in this identity crisis. And that's why I couldn't establish meaningful relationships. And I had struggles in my marriage, and I didn't know how to deal with conflict because I was never taught how to be considered valid or worthy of anything. So it's super important that children have the environment that they can thrive in, because that's what makes them the best adult they can possibly be. I had to learn the hard way. I had to come and work through all of this on my own accord, and I had to come to the realization that I needed to do the work. I could have stayed and became a victim, but I was never intended to be a victim. What I was intended, and this is ironic that we're at this particular point, is because, like we said in the beginning, I'm a cybersecurity specialist, and I've worked in cybersecurity for over 20 years, and I have the criminal justice degrees, but my lived experiences gives me a unique perspective on what happens, and it's all bridged together. All of these are pillars in what I bring today. So it's all about protecting someone or something, which I've been doing my whole life. I've been constantly trying to protect myself. I've always protected the underdog, the one that was being bullied. I stand against bullying in all forms. And here I am now bringing these all together in one package, to where I'm helping protect children going forward in this time and in this place. Because my purpose was never about back then. That was my conditioning and my ability to bring that forward, because I was strong enough to come out of it and have that authority today to speak to parents and to whoever needs to hear how we need to protect children, not just from being abducted as a child, not just from losing a parent, because those are very important, but also how we are parenting in the age of technology. What are we doing to safeguard children so that they are safe at home, so that they're not being in danger? They're not stumbling into these hidden dangers, because parents can identify that, but children aren't capable of understanding the difference between, should I trust him or not? Is this a real true person, or is this a scam? Children are not equipped with that yet. So parents have to be involved in there. So that's kind of what I'm bringing with all of this tied together.
It's almost like a perfect storm at the moment for,
it's definitely an epiphany.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even with all this sort of family law issues and the way sort of, families are being pulled apart, then to have something like the internet and the technology and the social media being what it is, it's so rife that there is children and young people out there who are just absolutely in pieces, like mentally and what have you, over something as something as easy to incorporate as like a cybersecurity, sit down, or like a run through or a refresh or what have you. I mean, I don't know exactly what you do in regards to cybersecurity, but maybe you'd tell us a bit more about that.
Oh, sure. So mostly what I've done is I protect data and identities. And it's ironic that, identities is something that everything I do revolves around identity. And so working through some of this stuff, it's like that was a huge thing. So my tagline is, in cybersecurity, they talk about data is the new oil. And I throw in the tagline of identity is the new gold. And with my company name, it's called Securing Everything. It's literally it can touch on all these different pillars or tentacles of what needs to be secured. So we're not talking about just cybersecurity. We're talking about childhood and how they can be secured. And when children are depressed and feeling isolated or feeling anger towards any given situation, what do? They go online. They reach out to friends on the internet, and they're not always making the best choices because they're not really being governed or guided because they know more than most parents know. So we've kind of flipped the roles where they have more freedom online than parents realize. And that's a huge danger for the child. And parents, and it is cute because I remember, you think back at your kid and they do something so amazing and it's like, oh, that's so cute that they did that. But when you think about how cute it is that you didn't know how to do something on your phone or on your desktop, and I had to call and ask my son to fix it for me. I had to get my 14-year-old in here to show me how to do this, that, or the other thing. It's cute until it's not cute, until they're in trouble, until they're faced with something that you don't know about because you don't know enough about the technology or about how social media works to protect them. And that's what I want to do, is help parents learn what they need to know so that they're not missing out on these particular areas where children still need to be protected.
No, that's
so it's still about protecting.
Yeah, that's the definite message. I mean, I know that I'm in a few sort of arms races with the teenagers and stuff at the moment, like you sort of think, oh, I know what I'm doing with Facebook. Okay, yeah, Facebook can be quite dangerous. And then they go, yeah, but Facebook, nobody uses it anymore, right? It's all about Snapchat and Instagram.
And that's the problem. And you're like, wait, what?
Yeah,
what,
and then
Snapchat?
yeah. So I'm like, okay, Snapchat. Well, how do you lock that down? And then you think, well, okay, yeah, you can lock that down. But now it's all about TikTok, right? And then it's all about something else, and there's something else, and there's probably a number of things that I don't even know about.
Oh, how about the more than 3,000 acronyms that your children have access to that helps them have communications that conceals it from you, because to you it looks like gibberish.
Yeah.
But it really means something.
And it can be pretty dark things.
Pretty dark. Absolutely. So, yeah, I mean, and now I know that I have to legally reverse my adoption in order to be who I am, or who I always thought I am. And as far as I'm concerned, I 100% identify with who I am. And no court is going to tell me otherwise. And some people say, well, then why bother? Because it's the principle, and it's the last tribute I can give to my father, even though he's not here. But I can be my brother's legal sister.
Yeah.
I can be my niece's legal aunt. To me, that is like me controlling 100% of my identity by taking that back.
Yeah, well,
it's an identity thing.
It's as important as it was for the authorities to change it in the first place. If it wasn't important for somebody to have that, then it's totally valid for you to see the importance to that. And it's not fair if anybody goes, well, why bother? But you should bother. You should absolutely bother about it. Because
absolutely,
it's not what you think about it now, it's what's going to turn up in the future as to why it's going to be important. You might not even know now why it's so relevant.
Well, I know that it's easy to live in denial, and I know that for other people out there that are like me, if they're not thinking that it's important, there might be a little bit of denial going on, because I know there's a spot inside that we all have that we're protecting, but it's the curiosity. Like, I really want to know, but I'm afraid to ask. Yeah. Or I really want to know, but I'm so angry at this whole situation, I don't think I need to deal with it. But if you can imagine that I'm full of holes, 50% of me has holes. And those holes are painful, and there's nerve endings around the outside edges of all these holes, right? And in order to dull that pain, I have to stuff stuff in there. I have to kind of like pack it so I'm not feeling that pain. And we grow up packing these holes, and it's a paper thin filling that makes it appear like we don't have holes, that we're a whole person, until something happens and you're like, okay, this pain is real. And when I found my father, I was able to pull off that paper thin layer and take out that stuffing. And I was able to replace it with the unconditional love that I never realized that he still had for me. So now those holes are really filled with love and who I am. I have the answers to all those curiosity questions. I know who my family is now. I did DNA tests, and they reached out to me and said, who are you? You know, and I now know who my other half of my world is. I was able to go on a family reunion road trip, and I went and met them. I reunited him with his favorite aunt and cousins that he lost track of before his mother died, that he hadn't talked to since then. And he was able to reunite with them before he passed away. So it kind of brought him full circle, where he lost all of his family. And then he has his, wife and sons, and then now he has the rest of us back too. And then he was able to speak to both me and to some of his family members before he left. So that was huge too. But the healing, you can't imagine the way you feel when you really acknowledge the need to heal. That healing, you can deny it all you want, but I know it's there, and you think it's okay now, but you don't know what it feels like to not just say it's okay, to say, I absolutely 100% know I am great, that I am whole. And there's no doubt, because there's no more concealed holes in me, because they've all been filled up with the love that was always needed.
That's an amazing analogy. It's a beautiful analogy of the holes being filled up, etc. So I can only, I can't imagine how elated you must feel. I mean, even just sort of sitting opposite the screen to you, I can see that there's like a I mean, I didn't know you before, but I can see that there's like a happiness about you when you speak about your father, and when you speak about this turning point of your life, which makes me feel that the 44 years that you had estranged from your father must have disappeared in the blink of an eye when you did find him.
And that's funny that you say that, because 44 years, and I talk to parents today, and they're like, I don't have 44 years. I need this now. I get it. That desperation, that's probably how my father felt. He didn't imagine that he needed to wait 44 years either. But I can honestly say now that I understand my purpose better, and why I had to go through that childhood to be able to be here today to speak to how I speak to people on not just protecting children emotionally, but protecting them in the cyberspace as well, because there's more of a need today more than ever. We had a 28% increase in calls to the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children in 2020. So there is an increase of those dangers going on, and people are starting to see it. We need people to continue to see that, so that awareness piece comes out. But I can honestly say, and it's taken me a long time to get here, but as of this last month, so this is brand new, is the first time I can say that I am actually grateful for my childhood. As bad and as horrible as it sounds, it's giving me that power and strength to do what needs to be done today. And if I didn't have that, I wouldn't have the impact that I need to have right now. So, I mean, that's the best way to look at it, I think. And, you know, my father's not here physically, but I feel like he would be sitting right here next to me, helping me build my business, helping me figure out ways to protect children. He would totally be all over this. So that is a comfort as well, because I think he is in his own way somehow here.
And you can do it in honor of him, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And you feel, like you said, you filled those holes. You have him now, you know, you have his identity.
I don't have that doubt. The doubt is a killer. That doubt is bad when it comes to children having doubt. It's a negative feeling. And as if you are saying that you're okay, but you have doubt about any of it, then you need to have a discovery moment.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, I think you're right. You're absolutely right. That's what an amazing insight into your life, into those years, and that and how it, I mean, coming full circle is really the way to describe it, you know, for you to have that and to do what you're doing now, and to intertwine it so well with the, you know, with the security message and the protection message, etc. It's really resonates. So it's
it really helps to not have all these straggled loose ends where you're thinking, okay, well, what was the point of that? What was the point of that? What was the point of that? It's nice to be able to tie it all up together and say, okay, I get it. I know why. I understand why I needed to go through these things. And that's what we're here. We're here to learn and to grow and to be the best people that we can be. And I know people say, but you only had 2 years with your father. That's just cruel. And it's cruel to like kind of dangle something in front of somebody and yank it away again. I get that. But I think of it this way, that my purpose was always on track, and it's in its own time. You can't force your purpose. So I had to be here on the other side of this. And what I think of is that I was given the opportunity to know my father for 2 years, because it may not have ever been in the plan, but I was given that insight because that's fueled me to push through and find ways to do this. That was the last key to being what I need to be right now.
That's beautiful. Really nice. Really nice to hear. I mean, I just am humbled to just be part of this story, and to be able to, you know, put as much detail as we put into this out to the, you know, to the wide world, you know, through the internet. What an amazing time we live in, you know, right now, and hopefully we can affect some change. But there's no reason why we can't do it with a smile on our faces as well.
No.
So, you know,
you can find happiness through all of the turmoil. If I can find happiness through what I've been through, and when I see parents, and when I see other children like me, adult survivors like me, I know that they can truly have 100% authentic happiness. And it does take work, and it's not an easy path, but it does take work, but you can replace the turmoil with happiness. I'm living proof of it.
I see it. I absolutely see it. It's very compelling. So tell me a little bit about what life is like now then. I see you've got cats.
She likes to photobomb me every time I go live. She's got to come in here and do something.
Yeah, she's been round in the background every now and then up on the fish tank. I thought that was hilarious. Yep. I was waiting for a moment where she might fish one of them out, maybe, or fall.
Well, in my own podcast or my own videos or my own meetings, people they're like waiting. Is the cat going to come in? Because she likes to jump up into the rafter up above, and she's entertaining my guests or my fellow companions.
Yeah. No, it's nice to have that. It's brilliant. Brilliant. So, Dawn, is there anything else you would like to? Is there anything else you'd like to cover off on the Philip Malowney podcast today?
Wow, we covered a lot of ground. There was something else that we wanted to. Oh, was the why I use my entire name. That's another.
Yeah. And Endria.
Endria. Yep, Endria is my middle name. So, I've had many names in my life, as you can imagine, because my name was changed, right afterwards, part of the, concealing and the adoptive name. And then I got married, and then I decided, okay, I don't want anybody telling me what my name is. So I changed my name to something completely different. I kept Dawn. Dawn was still in the middle. Right. But I was like, nobody's going to tell me my identity. I'm trying to find my own identity. So in 2000, I think it was 2008-ish, somewhere in there, I decided I'm going to be this person instead. And I went and legally had my name changed, but it never resonated. It never really worked very well. So then when I found my dad in 2016, I'm like, nope, that's who I am. So I changed my name legally back to Dawn Enderia McCarty in honor of him, and because he was devastated when he found out my name was changed. So the story behind Dawn Enderia McCarty and how, because it's not a common name. Endria is not a common name at all.
No.
So when I was being delivered, my mom was on the gurney and being rolled into the labor room, and they had decided to name me Dawn Enderia McCarty with an R-E-A at the end instead of R-I-A. Mm-hmm. So it was supposed to be Dawn Enderia McCarty. And as she's being wheeled into the room, she yells back at him, make sure you use Andrea with an I, Andrea with an E. And so he's like, okay, got it. So when she had passed out, so she couldn't complete the paperwork. So he gets to complete the paperwork, and he's filling out the name of, the child. So he writes in there, he's thinking, okay, Dawn Enderia McCarty, that means her initials will be DAM. And he's like, I don't want her initials to be damn. So he's like, nope, we'll use E. So he put E instead of A, and it became Dawn Enderia, and he left the I. He still put the I in there, even though she told him to use an E. So he actually named me, in essence. He changed the whole thing to be whatever he wanted it to be, just so I wouldn't have DAM as my initials. So Dawn Enderia it is. So that's why when I started advocating, when I started being out here on Facebook in this particular role, I took on that identity, because that helps me in reinforcing that is who I am. I have always been this person. I was born that person. I was derailed throughout life as far as identity goes, but I'm back to being who I was always meant to be. So Dawn Enderia McCarty is who I was always intended to be.
That's a good story around a name, if ever I've heard one. Yeah.
And I kind of like the fact that he named me. It kind of keeps me, it's just warming. It's warming when I hear it.
Like, there's not many people that have stories like that around it, especially then compounded by the rest of the rest of your life turns out. That significant moment when he did that. And then I suppose you only found that out, right, when you were
well, my mom did share some of that story with me, and then he confirmed and finished it up.
Right. Yeah.
So
brilliant.
It's been a journey, that's for sure.
Yeah. It sounds like, I mean, it's difficult to even put it into a sort of single shoot podcast, as it were. There's a lot. There must be so many little avenues and little directions.
Oh, there's lots of stories. I mean, I could go on and on and on, because there's so much that you're not able to share in one little podcast, like you said. So
yeah, we'll have to do a 6-parter for you, Dawn.
I'm looking for a producer.
Right? Yeah. I hear that a lot, because there's lots of people with these stories who really would like to get them out there. So if there are any.
One of the things I hear with my story is that it's not just about one little element. It's not just about like parental alienation. There's so many different elements. So my story touches on a broad spectrum of issues that can be wrapped up into one. And I hear it all the time that this needs to be something that's on the screen, because I believe I became the associate producer for Erasing Family documentary. Yes. And I believe 100% that we can change the hearts of children for the future, that children maybe now that have gone through what I've gone through, we can change the hearts of people through film. It's a captive audience, and you can guide them through. You can tell them the story without the parents telling the story. And the more that we put out there in film, and the more people can realize, oh my gosh, that had to have been difficult. And you know what? I have a friend that went through that. And now we start a conversation. Now we're starting to inspire people to speak up and share. And eventually, the more that are speaking up and sharing, the more we're going to touch the hearts that need to be warmed, because they're sectioned off. They're cold. They don't have any spark in there for that particular component of their life. Yeah. But film can warm their heart, even if they're the ones sitting in the audience. They can relate. There's somebody out there that can relate to one aspect or more of my story. So because of that broadness, it's not just about that piece or this piece. I can deliver a lot of relation to certain people.
Yeah, it's very true. And film does do that. Even to, you know, this modern time, you know, even a 30-second TikTok sometimes can be enough as well to just sort of capture that one person to look at it and go, do you know what? Yeah, that's me too. You know, I think Me Too's already been coined though, hasn't it? Yeah.
Oh yeah, there might be a different meaning.
Yeah, but that's, I mean, you know, yeah, I think if there's anybody, just make movies about it, do podcasts about it, spread the word, get the message. You know, one thing that I do say is this doesn't belong to me. This belongs to everybody. You know, the message. It's really bigger than me. It's bigger than you. There's a full society around the world which are really suffering from this bizarre distortion
I talk to people all over the world. Yep, definitely. And you know, it's funny that you say it's bigger than you, it's bigger than me, and it's true. And this is why I'm sharing, because if I sit on this story, nothing will ever change. Not at my hand, or not at, you know, for me trying to make a difference in this world. So the first year I started sharing this after my dad passed away, it was a struggle. I was really having a hard time. And I actually had some run-ins with some pretty vicious people that questioned who I was, which, if you know anything about me and my identity, the last thing you should do is question me about who I am. So I've had that happen twice. And the first time nearly made me walk away. The first time I was like, I don't need this. I don't need to stick my neck out here, sharing my story, reliving it over and over and over again, trying to help parents find hope, trying to help kids see the need to face their reality. I don't need all that. But then someone reached in and said, no, you need to, we need you to keep working on this. And actually, Ginger Gentile, who's the director of the Erasing Family film, she's one of them that said, no, we need to hear your voice. So that kept me going, and I stuck it out, and I became the chair for the National Parents Organization here of the state of Florida in 2019, starting to try and help in different ways. And then sharing my story once I locked in, and that's what made the difference. Locking in who I am and why I'm doing what I'm doing. Now it's really hard to argue with me about my opinion or my position, because I have the child's perspective, and there's nobody out there except for other people like me that can even touch that. You can't tell me how I felt or how I didn't felt because you didn't live my life. You can't tell me that it exists or it doesn't exist or it's invalid or it is valid because you haven't lived that life. I have. And, so that makes me I feel more powerful having that to guide me as I share my story now. So I'm not as inhibited in sharing it.
There's a real value to your experiences in bringing in children and bringing in young people who are, find themselves at the forefront of these issues, because they don't know what's happening to them, like day to day.
Right.
They can't see it because you didn't see it. You thought that was your, you were like happy to see your mum. Your mum grabs you and chucks you in a car and says, "This is your new daddy." So then you don't go, "Hang on a minute, I'm calling the cops." Right?
Right.
You're not equipped to do that as a 4-year-old, as an 8-year-old, as a 12-year-old. You don't have those. You don't have the armory to do that. So now you're giving your message. I feel there's a huge value in you being able to, I think of all the people that I've spoken to and what it would have been if their children as well would have just had an avenue to this kind of understanding as to what is going on and why it's not always cool not to see daddy, and it's not always cool not to see mummy.
Right.
Just because you're given this one-sided story of we just don't do that, and then and we don't go into it, we don't discuss it, we don't talk about it. It's just taboo within the family, because normally once you sort of scratch the surface on those kind of answers, you tend to dig up a bit of a stink.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point that when you brought up that you got this one-sided story. And if you know anything about making an informed decision, you know that you need to have your research in front of you. You need to know both sides of what's happening. You're doing that every day. Anytime you go to vote, you should know both sides, both candidates, right? You should understand what they stand for, what they don't stand for. So why would you allow one of your parents to hold the keys to your belief system instead of having the informed decision on what your values are, what you believe and don't believe, and who you are as an adult now? Why wouldn't you want to have all of the information at your fingertips so that you can make those informed decisions about one or the other? And also, I think it's important to realize that a lot of people think I should hate my mother. And I don't hate my mother. I don't approve of what she did. I don't like what she did, but I also can see and I can recognize that she had her own childhood trauma and that she had her own issues with her childhood growing up and who she became. So did she make the right decisions? No, absolutely not. But was it always her fault? Not necessarily, because we only do what we know and you repeat what you've been taught. So we're in this transgenerational cycle, and until it stopped, it never changes. So no, I don't hate my mother. I don't like what she did. We don't have a very strong relationship, but we do have one. And I haven't walked away from her, and I haven't put her in the light of this because I don't want people taking out their own anger because of their situation and applying that towards mine, because you can't do that. You can't cross that over. I'm the only one that can hold her accountable for what she did. Nobody else can. And I think that it's only fair for the child to see both parents in the same balanced way, where they were not perfect. They were never supposed to be. Nobody has a perfect parent. You might have a lucky situation where life is great and that's wonderful, but your parent was still never perfect. And we've made mistakes. I'm not a perfect parent. In fact, I've made mistakes that I wish I hadn't done. But my kids, they turned out great. And kids have to get rid of the idea that these parents had to have been perfect in order to be a parent. Because that's not. The most imperfect people can still be parents. So
yeah, I mean, it's so multifaceted, that anybody looking for perfection is going to be sadly disappointed. I mean, one of the things that I have more recently sort of come to terms with and looked at understanding is the philosophy that life is suffering, right?
mm-hmm.
You hear people saying that, and I've heard it throughout my life. Life is suffering. I've heard it, as a Catholic. You sort of embrace the suffering of life.
Mm-hmm.
But
it's your burden, right?
Yeah, it's only really made sense to sort of, once you recognize that life is suffering and you accept that life is suffering, you can then find those little nuggets of beauty and love and things that you're going to cherish. And then, so like when you do see your father, it snaps into
mm-hmm.
clarity,
right.
Things fall into place. And yeah, it's probably a bit rubbish that it was 44 years, but I'm sure looking back now, you kind of like go, what 44 years, almost, right?
Oh, I can look back and I think that seems like such a different world, a total different lifetime, where 2016 was only 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And that doesn't seem like that world is so far away from what I have right now. And it's really hard to imagine how much has changed since then. 44 years. Now that it's gone, it's like, oh wow, 5 years ago seems like forever. So it kind of removes the 44 length, the imagining that length of time, because 5 years has transitioned into, transformation is probably the word of the day.
Yeah.
It's been an amazing transformation, and it does reduce the what's the word I'm looking for? The duration, that wondering about how long that really
because there's a perception when you're treading water for 44 years in the unknown and in the murky water. 5 years of clarity is like, it's like, it's comparable.
That's nothing. Right. Yeah, it's amazing to be able to come out of that. So yeah, when you say children are resilient, this is what resilience looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Not turning 18 as like a rite of passage and all of a sudden the world's great again.
Yeah.
That doesn't exist. That's a myth. But the real rite of passage is when you come into your own finally, and you're out from underneath the control of one parent, the enmeshment that kind of guides your belief system, your values, your morals, your standards, what you believe about the other parent. You can't make an informed decision if your decision is still based on what they say it is.
Yeah.
So when you become into your own, and you really, really want to be your own person outside of mom or dad, that's the transformation. That's the amazing piece.
Yeah.
So.
No, totally. Oh, it's been such a joy. It's been such a joy and such a pleasure.
Well, I am so glad that we were able to spend this time. It's been what, 2.5 hours? Oh my goodness.
Yeah. We're cracking on. Not my longest podcast, but I'm sure there's people out there. I mean, you look at the statistics and what have you of like how long people watch for and what have you. But I've said it before and I'll say it again. The reason that I want to have a long, in-depth conversation is because I believe it has, there's a justice that I have to do your story that isn't 15 minutes long. There is a nuance there.
Right.
Like you have to tell us about Sammy Davis Jr. Right? You have to tell us about what was going on in your father's life and what was going on in your mother's life, etc., and and your stepdad and what have you. So there's a lot of nuanced elements for people to be able to understand. So I quite like it. I like that hopefully somebody's just sort of got their headphones in and they're learning about your story, and it resonates with them.
Speaking of the nuances and the little, side stories, is there anything that you need clarity on as far as why I discuss parts of it or not? Did we bring it all back into the fold?
Yeah, I believe so. I think if there was anything that felt untied, I don't think that would be detrimental to the basis of the story.
Okay.
There's obviously no, I don't think there's anything that's sort of hanging out there as being sort of glaringly obvious to understand, apart from the fact that you didn't discover Facebook and its merits to finding people soon enough.
That's a phenomenon all in itself, right? I guess
Get
I was
on
a little
Facebook,
protected.
Dawn.
My kids were raised with CSI, so.
Yeah. So, but hey, I mean, we live and learn, don't we? But yeah, no, that aside, I don't think there's anything that would uncover. But by all means, if there are any viewers out there that need some clarity or need some sort of dots connected, then stick it in the comments, and we'll do it again, Dawn.
Absolutely. Would be happy to come back for a second round.
Cover off any of those bits and pieces. Well, moving forward with the podcast, I'm you might be interested to know, and if you would ever like to, I'd be really happy if you could be a guest at some point in my next venture, which is like a magazine type podcast where I'm having a panel of guests in all manner of subjects, really, but it's going to be around the sort of family courts, parental alienation, etc. And we're going to be looking at discussing different aspects. So I'm recording one this quarter, which obviously I have the panel, it's all prepared, but next quarter after, or what have you, I'll be looking at doing other things, and maybe
that sounds fun.
Someday we could hopefully fit you in there, and you can come and tell us about your cybersecurity, et cetera.
Oh, I'd be happy to. That sounds very fun. That would be very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be my pleasure. So I guess with that, Dawn, thank you so much for taking the time and participating in the Philip Malowney podcast and being so open and honest and telling your story. It's been an absolute pleasure.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share more about it, to help bring awareness and prevent this from going forward.
Absolutely. Dawn, thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.
On a train, in a bus, in a car, on the way to your job. All alone with your kids, with your wife, or with your dog. You can listen anywhere, you can listen everywhere, to the Philip Malowney Podcast.